In a luxury resort, a shocking confrontation unfolds when Santiago Torres, a wealthy man, expels Maria Collins, a modest guest, from the poolside. But Maria's response to this humiliating act turns into a profound lesson in dignity and respect. Watch as we delve into a story where humility challenges privilege. Hello, welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. Maria Collins had long awaited this moment. From her quaint shop in the heart of Albuquerque, she had silently dreamed of an escape, an opportunity to leave behind the daily worries that weighed on her. Maria was not one to ask for much from life. From a young age, she had worked tirelessly to support her family. Now, her children were grown, and while she was proud of their achievements, she also recognized the sacrifices she had made for them. At 55, she finally faced the opportunity to fulfill a personal dream she had nurtured for years, a vacation at an exclusive resort promising total relaxation and luxury unlike any she had ever experienced. The journey from Albuquerque was long, but it didn't matter. Maria's smile was barely concealable throughout. She had scrimped and saved every penny, denying herself many luxuries to make this experience possible. This was her first time leaving the city in many years, and now, at last, the moment had arrived. The resort was a luxury destination, a place she had only imagined from magazine pages she had briefly browsed during her scarce free time. But this was no dream. This time, it was real. Upon arrival, the midday warmth greeted her, but it was not oppressive. Rather, it was the warmth of a well-deserved rest. The resort stood majestic before her, its elegant structures shimmering under the sun. The gardens were immaculate, with exotic flowers and perfectly trimmed trees lining the pathways to various areas of the complex. From the entrance, she could already glimpse the crystal-clear pools surrounded by sun loungers and parasols, providing perfect shade for those looking to unwind under the open sky. The hotel reception was nothing short of welcoming. The staff greeted her with friendly smiles, offering a refreshing drink as they finalized the check-in process. Though slightly intimidated by the luxurious surroundings and the elegantly dressed people around her, Maria decided to cast those thoughts aside. She had worked too hard to let something as trivial as insecurity ruin this moment. After all, she deserved to be here as much as any other guest. After receiving her room key, a bellboy showed her the way. The suite was simply spectacular, featuring a king-size bed with the finest cotton sheets, a terrace overlooking the gardens, and a modern yet cozy decor that beckoned rest. Maria could hardly contain her excitement. She left her suitcase by the bed and toured the room, gently touching each detail as if to reassure herself that everything was real. She approached the mirror, took a look at her reflection, a middle-aged woman with her hair pulled back into a simple bun, wrinkles that told stories of struggle, effort, and sacrifice. "You've earned this," Maria whispered to herself with a satisfaction smile she hadn't allowed herself in a long time. Her plan for the first day was clear: enjoy the pool. She had read in the resort brochure that the main pool was one of the highlights, surrounded by palm trees with impeccable service offering drinks and snacks to those lounging on the sunbeds. She changed calmly, choosing carefully the swimsuit she had bought specifically for this occasion. It was nothing ostentatious, but for Maria, it represented a small victory. After all, she had spent many years placing the needs of others before her own. When she arrived at the pool, the place was just as she had imagined. The waters sparkled under the sun as if bathed in liquid silver, and the soothing sound of water gently flowing from an artificial waterfall added a sense of peace she had not experienced in a long time. Around her, several guests were already settled in, some reading, others conversing softly, but all wrapped in the tranquil atmosphere of the place. Maria chose a sunbed near the edge of the pool where she could dip her feet if she wished. She placed her towel carefully, sat down, and let the warmth of the setting envelop her. The first sip of her iced drink was refreshing, and for the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to simply exist in that moment, without worries, without responsibilities. The gentle breeze caressed her skin, and for a brief instant, everything seemed in perfect harmony. However, this tranquility would not last long. It was only a few minutes before Maria noticed a shadow looming over her. At first, she thought it was a passing cloud covering the sun. But when she opened her eyes, she found herself looking up at a man with broad shoulders and a stern expression, wearing an expensive swimsuit that seemed to scream status with every fold. Maria's surprise was evident on her face, but before she had time to react, the man began to speak. "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" he said, his voice not kind but rather loaded with contempt. Maria, puzzled, looked up, not fully understanding the situation. "I'm resting," she replied softly, trying to maintain her composure in what seemed to be a misunderstanding. The man scowled as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. His gaze swept her from head to toe, clearly judging her. "You should go to another area," he said, his tone now unambiguous. Maria's heart raced, feeling a mix of indignation and shame at being treated this way, but she did not let her emotions control her. Instead of responding with hostility, she stood up slowly, gathering her things with dignity. She didn't want to make a scene, much less in a place she had dreamed of visiting for so long. However, deep inside, she knew she would not let this humiliation go unnoticed. Before leaving, she cast one last look at the pool, knowing that what had just happened was not the end of her story. As she walked back to her room, something inside her began to stir. That man had awakened in Maria a strength she had not felt in a long time. It was not just about defending her right to enjoy her vacation, but about showing that arrogant person what respect and dignity meant. But that part of the story was still to be written, and Maria, with firm steps, was ready for the next chapter. When Maria returned to her room, she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The feeling of discomfort she had experienced by the pool was transforming into a mix of indignation and sadness. How was it possible that someone could treat her that way just because of her appearance? Instead of letting those thoughts dominate her day, she decided to give herself a break. After all, she had worked too hard to be in that place, and she was not going to let one arrogant attitude steal her moment of peace. She looked at herself in the mirror again, this time with renewed determination. She knew that while her day had not started in the best way, she would not allow that experience to define her stay at the resort. She decided that instead of hiding, she would face the situation differently, more calmly, and make sure her effort and sacrifice were recognized. A couple of hours passed before Maria decided to go out again. She wanted to enjoy the environment without feeling anyone's judgmental gaze. She went down to the resort's restaurant, an elegant and welcoming place with large windows offering a panoramic view of the sea. As she took her seat, she couldn't help but notice that at the table next to her sat the same man who had humiliated her earlier by the pool. His mere presence seemed to darken the atmosphere. Santiago Torres, the man who had disrupted her peace that morning, was a successful businessman and a frequent visitor to the resort. For him, places like this were merely an extension of his everyday life. He was accustomed to moving among luxuries that his wealth had allowed him to acquire, and this had created a sense of superiority, one he did not hesitate to demonstrate to those he considered inferior. As he noticed Maria there, his expression hardened. It was as if he could not understand how that woman, whom he had treated with disdain, dared to be in his presence once more. But Maria, far from feeling intimidated, decided to act with serenity. While Santiago watched her out of the corner of his eye, she continued with her meal, enjoying every bite unhurriedly. The food was delicious, and for a moment, Maria managed to disconnect from the tension emanating from the next table. Although she knew the businessman was watching her, she remained calm, determined not to let herself be affected. However, something inside her told her this would not be the last encounter with him. After finishing, she decided to walk through the resort's gardens. The fresh air and the soft sound of the sea helped clear her mind. As she walked along a path surrounded by flowers, she began to reflect on what had happened. It was not just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a society that often judged people by their appearance, their origin, or their economic level. Maria had lived her entire life facing such prejudices but had never allowed them to define her. She was not about to start now. As she walked, lost in her thoughts, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned her head and, to her surprise, saw Santiago Torres approaching. Her heart beat faster, but she forced herself to remain calm. There was something in his gaze that suggested the man was not exactly coming to apologize. "We meet again," said Santiago, his tone trying to be casual, though his arrogance was still present in every word. Maria looked at him silently for a moment before responding. There was no reason to continue with this uncomfortable power play. She knew that if she spoke, it had to be with firmness, but also with the respect she had always defended. "This is a big place," she replied, maintaining her calm. "I suppose it's inevitable to run into the same people more than once." Santiago watched her with a smile that was not quite friendly. He was not used to people challenging him, even subtly. However, something in Maria's serenity puzzled him. It was not a confrontation he was seeking, but he also did not expect her to simply ignore him. Something inside of him, a small but persistent sense of discomfort, began to emerge. "You're right," he said, though his tone still carried a slight superiority. "It just surprises me that someone like you can enjoy a place like this." The comment, though subtle, was loaded with contempt. Maria knew it immediately, but instead of reacting with anger, she looked him directly in the eyes. She had learned throughout her life that words, when used correctly, have more power than any physical confrontation. "We all deserve to enjoy the fruits of our labor," she replied calmly. "No matter where we come from or how much we have, what matters is the effort we put into getting where we want to be." Santiago seemed taken aback by the response. It was not the reaction he had expected. He was used to people simply bowing their heads to him. But this woman, with her simple appearance, was challenging him in a way he did not know how to handle. He did not respond. He simply nodded with a slight grimace and walked away, leaving Maria alone in her walk. As she watched him disappear down the path, Maria could not help feeling a mix of emotions. She knew she had handled the situation in the best way possible, but she also understood that this would not be the last encounter with Santiago Torres. Something told her that this man, as arrogant as he was, had a story behind him, one that might explain his behavior. It was not the first time Maria had come across people like him, men and women who had built their lives around appearances, money, and power, but who, deep down, were just human beings carrying their own insecurities. The day was coming to an end, and Maria decided to return to her room. She knew the next step would be crucial. As she sat on the balcony of her suite, watching the horizon tinged orange by the sunset, an idea began to form in her mind. She could not change the world, that much was clear. But perhaps, just perhaps, she could change the way that man saw things. It was not about a confrontation, but about an invitation to reflect. Maria had learned that sometimes the best way to face arrogance and contempt was not to return them with the same coin, but to show the other person that there was a different way of looking at life. With that idea in mind, Maria took paper and pen and began to write a letter. She did not know if Santiago would read it, much less if it would affect him, but she felt it was the right thing to do. Each word she wrote was charged with her experience, her values, and the lessons she had learned over the years. When she finished, she carefully folded the paper and left it on the table. Tomorrow would be a new day, and with it would come an opportunity to close this chapter in an unexpected way. Santiago Torres was a man used to having the world at his feet. From a young age, he had learned that money and power opened all doors. The son of a prominent businessman, Santiago grew up in an environment where the words impossible and no did not form part of his vocabulary. For him, life was a constant succession of successes, luxuries, and advantages that few could even imagine. He moved in the best social circles, closed million-dollar deals with a simple handshake, and his image was always associated with triumph. The resort where he was staying was just another exclusive place where he often relaxed, a place where everyone knew him and knew how to treat him with the deference he believed he deserved. Since his arrival at the resort, Santiago had enjoyed all the comforts the place offered. For him, all this was part of his lifestyle, something taken for granted. He woke up early to exercise in the private gym, had breakfast served on the terrace of his suite, and then spent most of the day at the pool or at the golf club, mingling with other businessmen like himself. At first glance, everything seemed perfect, but beneath that facade of success and arrogance hid a truth that Santiago rarely admitted even to himself. There was something in Santiago that kept him restless, a feeling that pursued him even as he tried to ignore it with every achievement he reached, with every luxury he acquired. The satisfaction was ephemeral, as if an inner emptiness accompanied him no matter how much money he made or how far he went. This feeling, which he himself did not fully understand, made him harsher with others, especially with those who, in his judgment, did not deserve to be at his level. He did not tolerate what he considered mediocrity or failure, and in his mind, Maria Collins, with her simple appearance and her calm attitude, fit perfectly into that category. When he saw her that morning by the pool, something in him was triggered. It was not just a matter of social class or status. It was something deeper. The sight of a woman like Maria enjoying a place he considered reserved for the elite was almost offensive. How could someone who did not fit into his world be there, sharing the same space as him? Santiago could not bear it. He felt uncomfortable, annoyed, as if Maria's mere presence questioned the natural order of things. The expression on his face, as he approached her that morning, had been a reflection of that annoyance. He did not need to say much to make Maria understand that, in his opinion, she did not belong in that place. What had irritated him the most, however, was not just her presence but the tranquility with which she had responded. There was not a trace of submission or shame in her, only a calm that he found incomprehensible. As he watched her walk away, Santiago felt a strange mix of satisfaction and bewilderment. He had managed to make her leave, but something about the way she did it did not allow him to fully enjoy his victory. Throughout the day, Santiago tried to distract himself. He immersed himself in his usual routine, played a couple of rounds of golf, had lunch with other businessmen, and closed a couple of deals from his phone. But the image of Maria continued to haunt his mind like a small thorn he could not remove. Why did that woman affect him so much? What was it about her that unsettled him? No matter how much he tried to rationalize it, he could not find an answer that satisfied him. That evening, while dining at the resort's restaurant, he saw her again. She was sitting at a nearby table, eating alone, but seemed to be enjoying her meal more than he was. Santiago could not help but notice how she moved with a discreet elegance, one that contrasted with the ostentation he usually saw in the people around him. She wore no designer clothes or expensive jewelry, but there was something about her that made her stand out. It's just a facade, he thought to himself, trying to convince himself that there was nothing special about her. However, the discomfort persisted. Santiago was used to being the center of attention, to being admired and respected by those around him. But Maria did not seem impressed by him, and that irritated him deeply. In his world, everyone knew who he was and treated him with the respect he considered deserved. But that woman had not even blinked when he had confronted her. She had simply stood up, walked away, and continued with her life as if nothing had happened. Santiago tried to shake off those thoughts as he sipped his wine, but he could no longer ignore what he was feeling. Maria had awakened something in him, a sensation he could not control, a mix of curiosity, frustration, and somehow, admiration. He could not understand why someone like her, without money or connections, could walk with such dignity in his world. Dignity was a luxury that only the wealthy could afford. How was it possible that someone without his power, without his influence, could show a confidence that even he, with all his wealth, struggled to have? That night, as he returned to his suite, Santiago allowed himself a moment of reflection. Deep down, he knew that not everything was right in his life. Yes, he had success, money, and all the comforts anyone could desire. But at what cost? He had built an empire, but in the process, he had lost something of himself. He had become cold, distant, unable to connect with others genuinely. Maria, with her serene attitude and her apparent disregard for appearances, had reminded him that there was another way to live, and although he did not want to admit it, that realization had shaken him deeply. The next morning, Santiago woke up with a sense of restlessness. As he prepared for his day, his mind kept returning to the image of Maria, and he could not help feeling a bit embarrassed by his behavior. He had never before questioned his actions in that way, but now, for some reason, he could not shake off that discomfort. He decided to do something about it, although he was not sure what. As he left his suite, a carefully placed envelope at the door caught his attention. He picked it up with curiosity, and upon opening it, He immediately recognized the delicate handwriting of Maria. It was a letter, and as he read it, something inside him began to change. The words she had written were as simple as they were powerful. Maria had not attacked him or insulted him. Instead, she spoke to him with a frankness he was not accustomed to receiving. Each word made him reflect on who he was, on the life he had built, and on what really meant respect and dignity. The letter disarmed him completely. For the first time in a long time, Santiago felt vulnerable. Maria had not only made him see his own prejudices, but she had done so with an elegance and a strength that left him speechless. He knew he could not ignore what he had just read. He had to find her. He had to make things right, not out of pride, but because something inside him, something that had been asleep for a long time, had awakened. That afternoon, after returning to his room, Maria sat in the chair on the terrace overlooking the resort's garden. The sun was beginning to set, and the sky was tinged with warm colors, oranges and purples, like a painting by nature. The air carried a gentle aroma of salt and fresh flowers, and despite everything that had happened that day, Maria felt a deep calm within her. From that small corner, she observed the beauty surrounding her, something so alien to her everyday life, but at the same time well-deserved. After so much effort, the words of Santiago Torres at the pool still echoed in her mind, but not with the intensity they might have had if she had been another person, someone less experienced in life. Over the years, Maria had learned a truth that helped her face difficult situations. A person's value is not determined by what others think of her, but by how she perceives herself and by the actions she takes when faced with adversity. And Maria valued herself highly. Despite the cruel words and the disdain in Santiago's eyes, she knew she was no less than anyone else at that resort. She had arrived there by her own means, and that was what really mattered. As she sipped tea she had prepared in the small coffee maker in her room, she let the tranquility of the moment envelop her. From the terrace, she could see some guests walking along the paths among the gardens, probably getting ready for dinner. The lights of the resort were turning on gradually, creating a cozy and almost magical atmosphere, as if that place were destined to be a haven of peace for those lucky enough to find it. And although her arrival had not been what she had expected, with the incident at the pool still fresh in her memory, Maria was not going to let that experience define her stay. Maria knew from her childhood that the world was full of people who judged others by their appearances. She had grown up in a humble family in a neighborhood where everyone struggled to get ahead. Her parents were hardworking people, proud of the little they had, but always reminded her that true wealth was not in money but in respect for others. Respect is earned with actions, not words, her father used to say, and that lesson had accompanied her throughout her life. So when Santiago had treated her with so much contempt, Maria had not taken it as a personal attack, but as a reflection of Santiago's own issues. She had met many people like him, men and women who, because they had more material possessions, believed they were worth more than others. However, throughout her life, she had learned that those people were, in fact, the most fragile. They were so concerned about appearances, about maintaining that facade of success and power, that they forgot what really mattered. True wealth, Maria thought, was an inner peace, in the ability to sleep each night with a clear conscience, knowing that one had done the right thing without trampling on others. And that was precisely what had driven her to write the letter to Santiago. She did not want a confrontation, she did not need an apology, and she did not even expect him to read it. But Maria felt that somehow she had to express what was inside her, not just for herself but for him. Maybe, she thought, no one had ever tried to talk to Santiago with respect, with empathy, from life experience. Throughout his career, it was likely that Santiago had been surrounded by people who flattered him, who praised him for his money and his power, but no one had spoken to him from the heart as Maria had. So, sitting at the small table in her room, with a sheet of paper in front of her and a pen she had brought with her, she began to write. The words flowed naturally, as if each one had already been waiting inside her, ready to be expressed. She did not speak to him about her anger or the humiliation she had felt at the pool. Instead, she spoke to him about her life, about the lessons she had learned over the years, about how respect is not earned with money but with the way one treats others. She told him about her childhood in Albuquerque, about her shop, and how she had worked hard to raise her children without anyone's help. Each word she wrote was a reminder that life is not always easy, but that does not give anyone the right to belittle others. Maria also explained something she considered fundamental: that real power does not lie in having more, but in being able to look anyone in the eye and treat them with dignity, regardless of their economic situation, their appearance, or their social position. In her life, she had met people with much less than Santiago, but with a generosity and humility that far surpassed him. On the other hand, she had met people like him, who clung to their wealth as if it were the only measure of their worth. However, she knew that deep down, those people were the unhappiest. When she finished the letter, she folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope. It did not weigh on her to have spent that time writing it. For her, it had been a way to release what she had inside, a way to close the chapter without harboring resentment. As she left it at Santiago's door, she felt a kind of peace. She knew she had done the right thing, that she had acted from her truth. Would he read the letter? Would it matter to him? She did not know, but that was no longer her concern. She had done her part, and that was enough for her. As she returned to her room, she allowed herself to enjoy the rest of the night. She prepared a hot bath, filled the tub with perfumed water, and let the fatigue of the day dissolve in the heat. As she submerged, she closed her eyes and let her thoughts float freely. She was not thinking about Santiago or what might happen the next day. She was only thinking about how fortunate she felt to be there, to have achieved something as significant as that trip, which represented much more than just a vacation. For Maria, that moment was the symbol of years of effort, struggle, and sacrifices that had ultimately been worth it. When she got out of the bath, it was already late. The distant sound of the sea reached her room, and from the window, the stars shone in the sky like small beacons of light. She sat for a moment in front of the mirror, looking at her reflection. There she was, a woman who had traveled a long road. The wrinkles on her face told stories. The gray hairs in her hair were witnesses of time, but her eyes remained the same, full of determination, strength, and life. Before going to bed, she looked once more at the door. She knew that tomorrow would be a new day, but she could not predict what would happen. However, what she did know was that whatever happened, her dignity would remain intact. And that, for Maria, was the only thing that really mattered. With that thought, she turned off the light and plunged into a deep sleep, one that enveloped her in the same serenity she had felt throughout the day. Life, after all, continued, and Maria was ready to face it all with the same calm and wisdom that had always characterized her. Santiago Torres woke up early that morning, as he usually did, despite being in a resort where most guests took advantage of sleeping in late and enjoying the rest. He could not break his routine. For years, he had developed the habit of starting his day with exercise, followed by a light breakfast before dealing with any pending business. That morning, however, something felt different. There was a slight discomfort in the air, a sensation that Santiago could not quite identify. It was as if something was bothering him, a small but persistent thorn embedded in his conscience. He got out of bed, put on the hotel robe, and headed to the door to pick up the newspaper and go about his usual routine. But something else caught his attention. On the floor, right in front of the door, there was an envelope. Santiago picked it up with curiosity. It had no mark indicating where it came from, nor any name written on it. Upon opening it and seeing the contents, he recognized the neat and elegant handwriting of Maria Collins. For a second, the wounded pride of Santiago led him to think of setting the letter aside, ignoring it completely. After all, what could that woman possibly have to say to him? However, something inside him urged him to keep reading. Maybe it was guilt for what had happened the day before, or perhaps it was just simple curiosity. In any case, Santiago sat down in one of the chairs on his terrace, set the newspaper aside, and began to read Maria's letter. It was not long, but each word was charged with a depth that Santiago did not expect. Maria did not limit herself to reproaching his behavior or recriminating him for his arrogant attitude. Instead, she spoke to him about her life, the difficulties she had faced, the sacrifices she had made to get to where she was. She told him how she had worked hard all her life, how she had raised her children alone, and how, despite the adversities, she had never lost faith in herself or in others. Santiago read carefully, surprised by the serenity with which Maria spoke to him. She explained that she was not seeking his approval or his compassion, but simply respect. Respect, Maria wrote, is not a luxury reserved for a few. It is something we all deserve, regardless of our circumstances. Those words resonated with Santiago in a way he did not expect. Respect. How many times had he gone through life without thinking about that word, without stopping to consider whether he was showing respect toward others? As he continued reading, something in him began to change. Maria spoke to him about the lessons life had taught her, about how she had learned to face prejudices and not let the opinions of others determine her worth. She told him how, over the years, she had found strength in her work, in her family, in her ability to overcome difficulties with dignity. She reminded him that money was not what defined a person, but their actions, the way they treated others. Santiago set the letter down on the table in silence as he stared at the horizon. Maria's words had touched him deeply, even though he did not want to admit it. He felt a mix of shame and bewilderment. All his life, he had believed that his success and his fortune were what made him superior, what gave him the right to demand respect and admiration. But now, for the first time, he wondered if that respect he so demanded from others was really earned. How did people really see him? Did they fear him for his power and his money, or did they respect him for the person he was? Maria's words had awakened a reflection in him that he had not expected. Until that moment, he had lived under the assumption that his life was perfect just as it was. However, upon reading the letter, Santiago realized that there was something missing, something that money could not buy: the ability to truly connect with others. He had spent so many years building a barrier between himself and the rest of the world, protecting himself with his arrogance, that he had forgotten what it was like to be vulnerable, what it was like to treat people with empathy and respect. Santiago got up and paced the room. The fresh morning air entered through the windows, but inside, everything felt different. Maria had given him a lesson without intending to, a lesson that no business book, no millionaire mentor had ever taught him. It was a lesson about humanity, about what it really means to be a good person. For the first time in a long time, Santiago realized how far he was from being that. He knew he could not leave things as they were. Maria had shown great dignity in writing him that letter, despite the mistreatment he had given her. Santiago could not just sit idly by. He knew he had to find her, he had to speak to her, and more importantly, he had to apologize. But this time, it would not be a superficial apology or a mere formality. It had to be sincere. He had to face his own mistakes and acknowledge the harm he had caused with his attitude. He dressed quickly, without the usual care he put into his appearance. Something more important than his image was at stake. When he left his room with Maria's letter still in his hand, he headed straight to the reception. He asked for Maria Collins' room number, and although the resort staff hesitated a bit, they eventually agreed to give him the information. Santiago thanked them with a slight nod of his head and headed towards the wing of the hotel where Maria was staying. As he walked through the corridors, with each step he took, he felt something inside him loosen, as if an armor he had been building for years was beginning to crack. He thought about all the times he had gone through life without stopping to think about others, about how he had used his wealth and his position to impose his will without considering the consequences. Now, for the first time, he felt the weight of those decisions. When he arrived at Maria's door, he took a deep breath before knocking. He did not know exactly what he was going to say, but he knew he had to do it. He wanted Maria to know that her words had not fallen on deaf ears, that they had reached the deepest part of his being, and although he did not expect her forgiveness, at least he wanted to show her that he was willing to change. He knocked gently on the door and waited a few seconds. Then, Maria opened it, and seeing him there, her face reflected a mix of surprise and serenity. She said nothing, simply looking at him, waiting for him to speak. "Miss Collins," said Santiago, his voice not his usual one, full of authority. "I read your letter, and I just wanted to tell you that I am very sorry for what happened yesterday. I was wrong. I was arrogant and inconsiderate, and there is no excuse for that." Maria listened attentively, and although she did not smile, her eyes showed an understanding that Santiago did not expect. "Thank you for reading it," she replied. I'm not looking for an apology, Mr. Torres. I just want you to realize that we all deserve respect, no matter who we are or where we come from. Santiago nodded, understanding the message. He did not know how, but in those few minutes, he had felt something he had not experienced in years: humility. And although the road to change would be long, he knew that this encounter with Maria had been the first step. The day after receiving Maria's letter, Santiago Torres woke up much earlier than the sun illuminated the horizon. He was restless, as if his body had absorbed the tension he had felt since the moment he read those sincere and profound words. He was accustomed to starting his days early, but that morning there was something different. He felt strange, as if something inside him was out of place, uncomfortable in a way he could not fully explain. He got out of bed a bit clumsier than usual and headed towards the window of his room in the resort. From there, he could see the vast sea in front of him, its surface barely altered by small waves breaking gently against the shore. In the distance, the sky was beginning to acquire a faint pink color, signaling the arrival of dawn. The day promised to be as perfect as all the previous days at the resort: warm, with gentle breezes and that constant murmur of the sea inviting relaxation. However, Santiago did not feel at peace. Something had changed inside him since the previous day, and he could no longer ignore it. After a while of observing the horizon, he headed towards the door of the room to pick up the newspaper, a habit he followed religiously. It was not so much that he cared about being up to date with the news, but it was part of his daily routine, a way to remind himself that he was in control. However, when he opened the door and found Maria's envelope on the floor from the previous day, his usual routine had been interrupted, and with it, his apparent control over the world around him. Maria's letter had been an unexpected blow, a mirror showing him an image of himself that he did not like to see. Since he read it, he had been dealing with a flood of emotions. At first, he felt irritation. Who was that woman to give him lessons? But then, as Maria's words settled in his mind, he began to feel something different: shame. Shame for how he had treated her at the pool, for his arrogant attitude, for the contempt he had shown her without any reason other than considering her inferior. Maria had not only responded with dignity, but instead of returning the blow with rancor, she had extended a hand of reflection. And that simple action had left him bewildered. Santiago was a man who had lived his entire life believing that respect was earned through power, success, and money. He had built his identity around those ideas, and they had worked for him. Or at least, that's what he thought. But now, sitting in his luxury suite surrounded by all the comforts that money could buy, he realized that something was missing, and that something was the ability to connect with others, to see beyond appearances, to be truly respectful to those around him. At that moment, he understood that everything he had built lacked meaning if he could not learn to be a better person, to treat others with humanity. After a while, he decided he needed to do something about it. He wanted to thank Maria in some way for showing him that uncomfortable truth, for having confronted him with his own flaws in such a delicate yet powerful way. But above all, he wanted to apologize for real. Not the kind of superficial apology he had offered many times in the past to maintain appearances, but a sincere apology that came from recognizing his mistake. He dressed quickly, without the usual care he put into his appearance. He was too focused on what he wanted to do to worry about how he looked. As he walked down the hallway towards the hotel lobby, his mind kept spinning around one question. How had he become the kind of person he had been the day before? He remembered his youth when he and his brother Felipe shared a simple, unpretentious life before business success separated him. Felipe had always been the calmer one, the one who valued the little things in life. Santiago, on the other hand, had always wanted more, and that ambition had led him to distance himself from everything he had once considered important. When he reached the lobby, he asked at the reception for Maria Collins, and although the receptionist looked at him with some curiosity, she finally agreed to give him the information he needed. Maria was having breakfast on the terrace of the restaurant, right by the sea, enjoying the morning breeze and the tranquility she herself radiated. Santiago headed there, nervous, something that did not happen to him often. He was not used to feeling vulnerable, but he knew that was the only way he could face what he was about to do. When he arrived, he saw her sitting alone at a small table, with a cup of coffee in front of her and a book in her hands. Despite being in a luxurious environment, Maria looked completely at peace, as if that place was neither more nor less than any other in which she could be. That was one of the things that had most impacted him about her. Her ability to be in any situation without losing her essence, without being intimidated by what others might think of her. Santiago took a deep breath and approached the table. "Miss Collins," he said in a tone softer than he himself expected. Maria looked up from the book and smiled slightly, although not surprised. It was as if she had expected this moment. "Mr. Torres," she replied with the same calm that had baffled him the day before. "I wanted to talk to you if it's not too much trouble," continued Santiago, nervous. "Of course, have a seat," said Maria, gesturing towards the chair in front of her. Santiago sat down, and for a few seconds, he did not know where to start. It was not easy for him, a man used to setting the rules and controlling every conversation, to find himself in such a vulnerable position. But he knew he had to do it, not just for Maria, but for himself. "I read your letter yesterday," he began, while his hands played nervously on the table. "And I don't know if I have the right words to express what I feel, but I want to try." Maria looked at him with patience, waiting for him to continue. His silence was not uncomfortable, but rather an invitation for Santiago to take his time, to not rush to give a superficial response. "I was an idiot," he finally said, and as he uttered those words, he felt a weight fall from his shoulders. "The way I treated you at the pool, my arrogance, my prejudice, I have no excuse for that. I've spent my life believing that respect is earned with power, but you've shown me that I was wrong." Maria nodded, but said nothing. She knew this was an important moment for Santiago and that she did not need to interrupt him. "I've spent so many years focused on success, on being the best, on proving my worth through money and position, that I've forgotten what really matters," he continued. "Your letter made me realize that. It showed me a part of myself that I didn't want to see but needed to face." Santiago paused for a moment, taking a breath. He was about to say something he had never admitted out loud. "I've been alone, despite everything I have, and it's not because of others. It's because of me. My arrogance has pushed away people who really mattered to me, and I've surrounded myself with people who only see me as a ticket to power. And what hurts me the most is that I hadn't realized it until now." Maria, with her typical serenity, listened attentively. Finally, she spoke. "We all make mistakes, Mr. Torres. The important thing is not just to recognize them, but to learn from them and act differently. Life gives us opportunities to change if we are willing to take that path." Santiago nodded, feeling her words resonate deeply within him. He knew Maria was right. It was time to leave behind his arrogance and begin to build a life based on something more than success and money. And although it would not be easy, he was determined to try. "Thank you," he said finally. "I don't know if I can change overnight, but I'm going to try. Thank you for showing me that there is a different way to live, a more authentic way." Maria smiled, this time with more warmth. "I'm glad to hear that," she said softly. "Life is a journey, Mr. Torres, and we are all constantly learning. It's never too late to start over." Santiago remained silent for a moment, letting those words settle in his heart. He had arrived at the resort as an arrogant man, convinced he had everything under control. But now, he would leave as someone different, someone willing to change, to be better, to treat others with the respect he had always demanded but seldom offered. In the end, it was not Maria who had changed. It was him. At the end of this story, what really resonates is how people can surprise us and change the course of our lives in unexpected ways. Maria, with her calm and dignity, transformed not only her own experience but also that of Santiago, a man who had never stopped to reflect on the impact of his actions. And it is that sometimes, life presents us with unexpected encounters that force us to see things from a new perspective. Have you ever met people who have taught you great life lessons, as happened to Santiago? Have you had to face situations where your dignity was put to the test? I would love to hear about your experiences and what you learned from them. So don't hesitate to leave me a comment below. Maybe your story can also inspire others, just as Maria did. If you like this story and it moved you in some way, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. We have many more stories like this, full of emotions and reflections that will make you think about your own life and the people around you. Activate notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos, and make sure to check out the previous one, where we shared another heart-touching story that will undoubtedly also touch your heart. A big kiss and see you in the next story.